Every hour of every day, this government facility in Washington, D.C. turns paper into money. In order to keep up with demand, these machines are running 24/7, pumping out more than $500 million into the U.S. economy every day. But this is only a tiny fraction of how much money is really made. Most of our money exists digitally, and this number currently goes up by more than $4 billion every day. But where does all of this money come from? Before it ever reached your bank account, it changed hands countless times, passing through people, governments, and businesses, all after being simply typed into existence on a computer. But in order to fully understand how we got to this point, we need to go back to a time before money. If a farmer, thousands of years ago, needed a new tool, he'd go to the local tool maker to buy one. The farmer didn't have anything to give him in return, so instead, they both just agreed that he owed him something in the future. Because the toolmaker trusted the farmer, his promise of future value was an acceptable form of payment. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, the farmer came back and gave him some food from his farm. To make transactions easier, people started to pay using more commonly used items like cattle, grain, and salt. Everyone needed these things, but they were hard to come by, and that's what made them valuable. The farmer could now buy a tool and pay for it right away, using a precise amount of grain that seemed like a fair exchange. This made transactions quicker, and both parties would leave with something valuable to them. But eventually the demand for trade was too much, and paying with a random mix of bulky objects wasn't good enough. People eventually settled on using metal coins, like gold and silver, since they were small, extremely valuable, and would last forever, unlike cattle or grain. Suddenly, trade around the world opened up, and things were being bought and sold all the way from China to Europe. But traveling with so much gold became heavy and dangerous. This was when the whole idea of money started to change. In 17th century London, trusted goldsmiths started to take in people's gold coins, promising to look after them for a small fee. In return, they would give the customer a piece of paper, a promise note that allowed them to retrieve their gold at any time. The key to this piece of paper was that the customer could go to any goldsmith in any town and claim back that exact amount of gold. The paper itself had no intrinsic value, but it became as good as gold. The notes were so convenient that people started simply exchanging them to buy and sell things. The goldsmiths realized that most people weren't actually coming to retrieve their gold, and so they started loaning out fake promise notes to customers, instant money that had to be paid back with interest, making the goldsmiths a small profit. This was fake money that didn't actually come out of their gold supply. If a goldsmith loaned out 100 coins, they wouldn't become 100 coins poorer. They'd simply write the customer a fake note that was worth 100 coins, which could be spent anywhere. Eventually, the customer would pay back the loan plus the fee, making the goldsmith 105 coins richer. On top of that, the customer would spend their money by paying someone for goods, making them richer. From that single loan, the total money in existence increased by 100 coins, yet no new coins were produced. This meant that more money was in people's hands than actually existed. As long as everyone didn't come to cash in their notes at the same time, everything would be fine. If we replace the goldsmiths with banks and the promise notes with digital money, we have today's system of money. We think of banks as places that store our money and keep it safe, but that's not really what's going on. When you give a bank your money, they are in debt to you. The numbers you see in your bank account aren't real wads of cash sitting in a vault. They are simply promise notes, showing that the bank owes you money and that you can claim it back whenever you want. A loan is the exact same, but in the opposite direction. When banks lend us money, we are in debt to them, and we have to pay them back. This is where money really gets made. Just like the goldsmiths, when a bank gives out a loan, they don't get poorer. They simply type new money into your bank account. It's brand new money that didn't exist before. The only difference is that when you pay it back, the money gets canceled out, and the bank only keeps the interest. But with that loan, you paid for a new car, and that money eventually made its way to the employees of the dealership. Then they spent that money, and it continued to create hundreds of new transactions, powering businesses, creating new technologies, and providing us with food. All of this value and productivity would never have happened if new money hadn't entered the system. The problem is that productivity doesn't necessarily increase when we create new money, and that can cause inflation. If society starts producing fewer goods, but more money is added into the system, prices will go up, since there is more competition for fewer goods. Because of this, banks have to limit how much money they create. In the past, they could only lend out a portion of the actual cash they had in their backup supply. Nowadays, though, banks have almost complete freedom to create as much money as they like. If they are running low on backup money, they can simply go to the central bank and ask for more money. And that's where things get ridiculous. To create new money, the government creates a bond, which is essentially a loan that provides a steady income. Banks, corporations, and foreign countries buy these bonds from the US government, and this influx of money goes toward the government's budget. The government uses this money to pay companies and people, and it eventually makes its way back to the banks. The problem is, the US government almost always spends more money than it makes, so it is constantly in debt to those that buy bonds. In order to pay for that debt, it uses the taxpayers' money. Last year, the government spent almost $7 trillion, but your tax money wasn't enough to pay for this. And so the government had to create new bonds to receive more money, putting it further in debt, and the cycle continues. As crazy as it sounds, this system of adding more money through debt is how most of the world operates. It isn't necessarily a bad system. It's just not running anywhere near maximum efficiency. If banks created money for more productive things, like businesses, education, and infrastructure, all of this money going into the system could give us higher returns in the long run.